What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 126 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. I wanted to segue away from the sword and sorcery barbarian stories that I've been talking about for the last couple weeks, and I figured since yesterday I talked about a medieval fantasy story by Chris Claremont that I would talk about another Chris Claremont book today. Sovereign 7. I bet you guys thought I was going to be talking about an X-Men book. This is by Chris Claremont and Dwayne Turner with one issue by Alan Davis. And this is the 5-issue Sovereign 7 series, as well as the annual and showcase issue 12. And this came from DC Comics in the early 90s. And I'm going to read the back cover to kind of give you a good idea of what the premise of this book is, because I think the back cover does a pretty good job of telling you what the premise is. 7 refugees from an interdimensional cataclysm that has destroyed the societies of all of their home worlds. The Sovereign team has been shipwrecked on Earth with no resources but the clothes on their back and their individual skills and character. Like every other immigrant to America before them, they are strangers in a strange land facing the challenge of making new lives for themselves. They are Sovereign 7. So like this back cover said, all of these characters, they come from 7 different alternate realities where there's this thing called the Rapture that is basically a giant hive mind that is trying to take over their worlds. And for whatever reason, it's happening on all of these worlds. And then these characters are all gathered together by one person whose mother is an evil despot of some faraway world in our reality, and they are all gathered together, and then basically the evil mother despot finds out that her daughter is leaving home, and then she leaves, and the mother is like, okay, I promise I'm going to find you, and I'm going to make you come back home. And then they wind up going to Earth, and then they find this diner out in the middle of nowhere that is very different. It's not exactly what it looks like. It's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. It's kind of sort of this interdimensional nexus to all these other realities, and it's run by these two ladies, and then they more or less make that diner their home and headquarters while they are trying to figure out what their next move is going to be. And that's basically what happens in this book. This is a very interesting book. I've read it twice now. I read it once years ago, and I absolutely hated it. I could not stand it. I thought that it was virtually unreadable. And then I read it again for this video, and I actually liked it quite a bit more this time than I did the last time. And I really couldn't tell you what exactly it was that I hated about it the first time that I read it, because I didn't think that it was all that bad this time. Now, it's not great. There are some things about it that aren't exactly good, but I don't think that it's the worst thing that I've ever read from Chris Claremont. I think that he's done a lot worse before. First of all, I really find this interesting because I'm pretty sure that this character, these characters and this concept is all creator-owned by Claremont and Turner. This was set in the DC universe, but I'm pretty sure that they reached some sort of agreement with the higher-ups that nobody else is allowed to do Sovereign 7 stories. After this, we did not get any other Sovereign 7 anything. So this is all that there is. And I found that very interesting because at this time, you had companies like Dark Horse Comics and Image Comics that had been around for a couple of years, but this was set in the DC universe. Claremont and Turner didn't go to Image Comics with their idea. They went to DC Comics and they said, this is going to be set in the DC universe, but we have complete creative control and complete ownership of these characters and this series. And for whatever reason, DC said yes. Now, I don't know if that worked out very well for Claremont and Turner. There was a panel discussion in the mid-2000s that Claremont was at that was on YouTube at one time. I don't know if it still is. And Claremont said that at that time, he figured that Sovereign 7 was still going to be going on in 2006, which is very interesting because when you read this, it's very clear that he and Turner were putting a lot of time and thought into this series. They weren't just trying to create another superhero series. They definitely weren't trying to create a ripoff of the X-Men. Now, there are some characters here that feel a little X-Men-y. The leader of this team, she kind of reminds me of Storm a little bit. There's another character in here, Walter Thorson. He kind of reminds me of Colossus. You've got all these characters who kind of sort of remind me of characters that Claremont had worked on before, but I think if this series had gone on a lot longer, I think that Claremont and Turner would have done their best to try and make these characters feel like their own characters. That's one thing that Claremont has always been, I guess it's been a problem of his writing, and I'm talking more about his writing right now than art. I'll talk about the art here in a little bit, but Claremont, he is always in it for the long con. He will start something, and then it will take him a very long time to develop that something. That's very evident in the X-Men comics of the mid-70s when he was first getting into the X-Men. It took him a little while to really find his footing and start fleshing out these characters, but once he did it, it was worth the wait. And you can tell that he is taking his time here. It takes them almost 7 issues to introduce all these characters characters and the status quo of this book. And I like that, but at the same time, I think that might have been a problem here. I think a lot of people were kind of expecting the status quo to go ahead and be set up by the end of the first issue. But 3 or 4 issues in, they're still exploring their headquarters, and they're still finding their headquarters, and they're still trying to find out what their mission statement is. And that's another thing that I liked about this book. At the beginning, there's a foreword by this author who's a friend of Claremont's, and she said that this book is all about identity and trying to figure out who you are and what your purpose is in life. And she was saying that this is the best series to explore that question. And I think that's a little bit bogus. I think most superhero books are about identity and trying to find out who you are and what your purpose in life is. Early Spider-Man is totally about that. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is about that. That's not a unique concept or premise, but I still like the way it's being explored here in this book. I just wish that we had more of it so we could exceed that premise, be explored a little bit more. There is a few things about this that I didn't like. Dwayne Turner's artwork, at times, I kind of like it because it reminds me of Humberto Ramos's artwork, but then at times it kind of reminds me of Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and Mark Silvestri, and that was the popular style at that time from Image Comics, but I wish that Dwayne Turner was trying to do his own thing a little bit more, and I haven't seen any of Dwayne Turner's modern artwork, anything that he's done after Sovereign 7. Maybe he is a much better artist now. Maybe he has found his own style that isn't anything like any of those other guys, but just looking at his work here, you could tell that he's trying to do something different, but mostly he's trying to ape the style of the popular artists of the time, and I wish that he didn't do that. I wish that he tried to do his own thing in this book. Also, there is this thing that Claremont does here where he will throw in cameo appearances of characters that he's worked on before. I talked about this diner out in the middle of nowhere. At one point, it's very heavily implied that Logan from the X-Men is there. He's sitting in an armchair. You don't actually get to see him, but off camera he says, "Hey, I want a beer," and then one of the characters throws him a beer, and then again you don't see anything, but you see that this character is wearing cowboy boots, and then you hear "Snick it," and then we get back to our characters talking about whatever it is that they're talking about. I didn't really need that. I don't need you to do cameo appearances of characters that you just finished working on for the last 16 years. I really don't need that. Yes, we know you're Chris Claremont, you worked on the X-Men, but now you're working on Sovereign 7. Work on Sovereign 7. Don't keep throwing the X-Men into this book. He does the same thing with Kitty Pryde and Illyana Rasputin at one point. For some reason, they leave the mansion to come to this diner out in the middle of nowhere to start doing their homework, even though the mansion is huge and they could just do their homework in their room. That was a little silly, and it's heavily implied that Lockheed is in her backpack and that she's giving some root beer to Lockheed. Lockheed, you know, haha, it's very funny. Again, I don't need these cameo appearances from X-Men characters that Chris Claremont misses working on. You've also got cameo appearances from characters in the DC Universe, which those appearances are a little bit less subtle because this is set in the DC Universe. Lobo shows up in an issue, and that's not really a cameo. That's really more of just a guest appearance. Barda shows up too, but she really doesn't feel like Barda at all because for some reason she has this shapeshifter thing going on. It's explained in the story, but it's really weird, and as a result of that, she doesn't act like Barda, and I'm not sure if that's because Chris Claremont didn't have a hold on the character, or if he was deliberately miswriting her because she had this shapeshifter thing going on. But you have Darkseid. He shows up a couple of times here. He's apparently really good friends with the main character's mom, which is really weird. Darkseid does not act like Darkseid here at all. He shows up at the diner, and he basically tells his Furies to back off, and then he says that he likes this place because this is the only place that he can get a certain beverage, and that they don't make it on Apocalypse. That's stupid. Darkseid is not that kind of character. Darkseid is pure evil. He's not going to leave this place standing because he's friends with the main character's mom. That's all very stupid, and I feel like Chris Claremont really didn't need to be using the Fourth World characters if he didn't know how to write them. And I'm the kind of hypocrite that I don't like it when most people use the Fourth World characters. There's just a handful of people that I think should use those characters, and obviously I don't think that Chris Claremont should. Overall, I think that this book is okay. If you are a huge fan of Chris Claremont and you really like a lot of what he did on the X-Men in the 80s, I would recommend that you check this out, keeping in mind that it is going to be a little bit of a slow burn. It takes a little while for it to get to the point, and then by then it's too late because the series ended. And some of these characters are going to feel a little bit derivative, but if you're a huge fan of Chris Claremont and you want to see something different from a 90s superhero team that's not exactly like every other brand new 90s superhero team, I would definitely recommend that you check out Sovereign 7. I ended up enjoying myself a lot more this time than I did the last time I read it. Like I said, I have no idea what it was that I hated about this book so much the last time that I read it, but overall, I enjoyed this book quite a bit. So I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.